With ISIS largely defeated in Syria, Israel is sounding the alarm about Iran's intentions there to fill the power vacuum along what used to be Israel's quietest border. From his recent meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin to the visit of UN Secretary General António Guterres, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has one message.
Iran is busy turning Syria into a base of military entrenchment, and it wants to use Syria and Lebanon as war fronts against its declared goal to eradicate Israel. This is something Israel cannot accept.
A senior Israeli official was even quoted recently as warning Russia that Israel would bomb Syrian President Bashar Assad's palace in Damascus if Russia allowed Iran to make military advances in Syria. In an interview with the Jerusalem Post, U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman said that the U.S. and Israel are of the same mind when it comes to keeping Iran from spreading out in Syria.
Iran is a scorpion that will bite you eventually, and you can't cozy up to them.
You see a growing concern in the United States about where Iran is headed and what their intentions are.
Visiting U.S. lawmakers voiced their support for a strong U.S. position.
So that means, yes, sanctions, but it also means beefing up our military so that we can deal with this growing threat.
If there is no future for them or no accommodation for the Sunni Arab in both Syria and Iraq, then it's just going to be some new black flag group, round 14 of whatever other conflict you want to try to spin it off from.
Oklahoma Senator James Lankford says the U.S. hasn't been clear on Syria policy.
Iran is currently propping up Bashar Assad, and if we leave Assad in place there, then that means Bashar Assad owes his position to Iran, and Iran's going to do whatever they want in Syria. That's a threat to Israel.
But one thing's for sure, he said, Assad has to go.
We have to be very clear to the Russians, to the Iranians, and to the people of Syria that there has to be a transition. 10 million refugees cannot return to Syria if Assad is still there. The reason they fled was because of Assad.
That transition, he said, is in the best interest of Israel and the refugees. I'm joined now by CBN senior editor John Wogge to talk more about U.S. policy and the threat of Iran. John, welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline, and welcome back to Jerusalem.
Thank you, Julie. Great to be here.
Well, it's clear that Israel is not happy with the world's policy or the world's approach to business as usual of Iran in Syria. Is that message being received in the Trump White House?
Well, there's no doubt, Julie, that the message is being received. The question is whether it's being acted upon. And I think that the Trump White House, there's still a lot of sympathy and certainly a lot of knowledge. You know, there was a Mossad delegation, the Israeli intelligence service, that went to Washington to explain Israel's concerns just a couple weeks ago about Iran's role in Syria and the threat it poses to Israel. So they know about it, and they know it in detail, what's happening there. The question is where it falls on the priority order. President Trump may have a heart for it, and he is on the phone with Prime Minister Netanyahu quite frequently. So he knows about how important Iran is to Israel. The question is whether his administration, in dealing with all the fires to put out, whether it's North Korea or Syria or ISIS attacking places like Barcelona, you know, that's where you've got to put it higher on the priority level. And right now, it doesn't seem that Iran's presence in Syria is generating that high priority target within Washington that Israel would like to see happen.
Now, we had some U.S. lawmakers here recently, and they were very tough. They were very clear that Assad had to go, that Iran was not allowed to be spread out. Do you think that all that is just talk, or Washington will actually act on it and have some deeds to back that up?
Well, I have no doubt that the congressman and the senator who was here, the ones you talked to in the story, they are completely sincere about the threat of Assad reestablishing power. Who would have thought 3 years ago when Barack Obama was saying Assad must go, and it was kind of generally agreed in Washington that that would happen, that now people are talking about him reassuming almost all the power that he had before. I mean, that's the kind of issue that's really troublesome for senators like James Langford and others, Tom Cotton, in Washington. So there's definitely a remnant of people within the Washington power structure who want to see Iran dealt with, want to see Syria dealt with, and want to see Israel protected from this encroachment that Iran is just blatantly doing. The problem is that the rest of the world is doing multiple billions of dollars of business with Iran, and they'd rather the whole Israel problem with them just go away.
Yeah, is it going to go away?
No, it's not going to go away. And you know, there are anniversaries coming up. Israel's about to celebrate its 70th anniversary as a nation next year in 2018. Iran will be celebrating 40 years since the mullahs came to power there. And what we're looking at is a world who's done literally almost nothing to stop their advances. There's been a lot of rhetoric and a lot of real warnings, especially from Prime Minister Netanyahu, about the threat that Iran poses not only to Israel but to the entire world, and yet the world would rather do business with Iran than deal with them in any kind of military way, despite the agreement that they've got.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how they kind of just keep spreading out, and nobody really seems to mind that they're doing that.
And that brings biblical prophecy into play. It's looking an awful lot with Russia aiding Iran in this process that the prophecies of Ezekiel coming against Israel seem to be at least in line to come closer. So.
Wow, yeah, so it's going to be exciting times ahead.
Time to be praying.
Thank you so much for your insights, John.
Thank you, Julie.